John Maxwell puts it simply. You must be able to lead yourself before you can lead others. See, most organizations promote their best people into leadership and never ask whether that foundation exists. And then they spend years wondering why everything downstream keeps breaking down. Today, we're going to fix that. Well, welcome back to the Frontline Leadership Podcast, where we help frontline leaders become professional leaders and transform business bottom lines in the process. I'm your host, Craig Coyle, former Apache helicopter pilot, aerospace leader, and founder of Operation Lead. And look, if you're a senior leader who continues to invest into developing your frontline supervisors, but you still aren't seeing it translate, I want you to know that you are not alone. But more importantly, I want you to know that there's a reason. So let's dive in. Last week, we talked about emotional intelligence. We talked about what it is. We talked about why it matters. And we talked about how its four components show up on your floor every single day. Well, two of those components, self-awareness and self-management, we talked about them being internal. They're about how your supervisor, how we understand and manage ourselves, and how we need to do that before we ever try to lead anyone else. So today we're going to go deeper on that idea, because underneath emotional intelligence itself, is something even more foundational. Most people call it self-leadership, and it's the prerequisite for everything else that we're going to talk about on this podcast, or you can even talk about in leadership in general. See, before a supervisor can set clear expectations or hold accountability, develop a team, or navigate conflict, they have to be able to lead the person they see in the mirror. Most organizations skip this step entirely, and then they wonder why everything downstream breaks down. Here's the reframe I want you to carry through everything that we're going to talk about today. Self-leadership isn't something your supervisors either have or don't have. It's not a position or a destination. It's a direction. Every habit, every daily choice, everything a leader orients their life around, that's the input. And how they lead is the output. You cannot change what shows up without ever changing what's being put in. Think of it this way. Our leadership is just our habits with knowledge. I want you to hold on to that, because for the rest of this episode, we're going to make the case for it. And then I'm going to show you exactly what it looks like to build it in yourself and help your leaders build it as well. So what is self-leadership, right? I mean, let's define it, because I think it gets really misunderstood all the time. Self-leadership, it's not crisis management. It's not about how your supervisors perform under pressure. And it's definitely not a personality trait that some people have or others don't. Self-leadership is a daily orientation. It's the way a leader goes about their business in ordinary moments, we'll say. How they carry themselves on the floor. The standard they hold themselves to when nobody else is looking. The habits that they maintain when nobody's grading or evaluating. Here's the critical distinction. Pressure does not create self-leadership gaps. It reveals them. The gap has always been there. That's why no one under the leadership is ever surprised when the gap gets exposed. The high-stakes moment just made it visible to everybody else. Which means the real question for your organization isn't how your supervisors perform when things go sideways. It's who they are and what they're building each and every day before them. And here's the physics of it. Self-leadership isn't a position. It's a vector. Just like velocity, acceleration, momentum. Think of it like driving a car up a hill. Most of us treat self-leadership like a destination we can just reach and park. But the hill doesn't stop. To even maintain where we are, we have to keep moving forward. Self-leadership isn't a noun, it's a verb. It's something you're doing or you aren't. So nobody's disqualified, but that also means nobody can coast, which begs the question, right? Are your supervisors moving towards productive self-leadership, or are they inherently moving away from it? Here's something worth sitting with, because I think it reframes the entire problem that we're talking about. Think for a minute about how your best frontline supervisors were developed in their technical skills. Now, that could have been through an apprenticeship, could have been a certification program, maybe it was a degree program or an internship. Whatever it was, there was a deliberate structure around them the entire time. Things like deadlines, standards, feedback loops, mentors who are correcting technique before bad habits calcify, clear expectations for what good looks like, and consistent accountability against them. See, that scaffolding existed for one purpose: to develop technical competence. But here's what nobody really plans for, and most people don't know this. In order to get through those programs, or earn the credential, complete the apprenticeship, graduate, get certified, self-leadership was required. It's not an option, right? You had to show up when it was hard. You had to manage your time when the demands were stacking up. You had to receive critical feedback and adjust without shutting down. You had to meet the standard, or you would face a real consequence. The program enforced basic elements of self-leadership as the price of entry. The student had no choice but to develop, not because anyone called it that, but because the structure made it non-negotiable. Now compare that to entering into leadership. The supervisor who ground through a rigorous technical program, who is genuinely forced to develop real self-leadership just to earn their place in their craft, now steps into leadership and finds an environment that doesn't meet the demand for up-leveling their self-leadership. No one's checking in to see if they're growing or not. No one's measuring whether they're managing themselves well. No one's holding them accountable to a standard of self-leadership the way the technical world held them accountable to a standard of craft. See, this is why strong self-leadership in frontline supervisors is so rare, and why intentional self-leadership development is almost non-existent. It's not a motivation, and it's not a character problem either. It's a structure problem. That scaffolding, the scaffolding that enforced self-leadership in the technical world, has no equivalent in the leadership world. And most organizations have never noticed that gap, let alone tried to close it. And think about what that means through the lens of what we established at the top of the list. The technical scaffolding was shaping inputs, things like accountability, feedback, standards, correction, on a consistent basis. Those inputs were quietly building the person. When the leadership equivalent is never built, the required inputs in leadership never form. And so the self-aware, self-managing, emotionally grounded leader that the operation desperately needs never gets systematically developed. The output always reflects the input. It always has. So what does that structure problem, the lack of scaffolding, if you will, actually produce? Well, here's what I think it looks like, not in the dramatic moments, but on an ordinary Tuesday. And this isn't an exhaustive list. Here's one example, the conflict one. Not calm, but conflict averse. They haven't done the internal work to sit with discomfort and move through it. So problems don't get acknowledged, and they definitely don't get addressed. Accountability conversations get delayed indefinitely, and the team learns quickly that nothing gets confronted here. And so performance, culture, and trust erode slowly as a result. Here's another one, the meeting step. We've all done there. The supervisor who thinks one-on-ones and team huddles are a waste of time. That's not a scheduling preference, right? It's a self-leadership statement. It's basically saying to a team, I haven't done the work to understand why investing and communicating to my people in these fashions matters. And so as a result, the team feels that every single day, whether it's through lack of communication or what have you. What about the pessimists or the cynic, right? Chronic bad self-talk exposed throughout the floor, creating negativity. Nothing ever changes around here energy. That's a self-leadership failure with a cultural blast radius. One cynical supervisor could poison the team's belief in their own potential faster than any culture-building effort can ever counteract. And this is the one that, unfortunately, I had to overcome. But it's the supervisor who doesn't understand that people are wired differently. The one who leads every single person the same way and can't figure out why certain people respond and others don't. A supervisor who can't connect with or activate certain team members, not because the people are difficult, but because the supervisor hasn't done the internal work to understand themselves well enough to then be able to understand others and lead them God. Here's what every single one of these portraits has in common. Each is a habits problem before it's a leadership problem. The conflict avoider hasn't built the habits that make discomfort navigable. The cynic hasn't consumed anything that orients them towards growth. The supervisor who can't connect with their team hasn't done the reflective work to understand their own work. None of these are attitude problems. They're self-leadership gaps. And they have consequences that show up in your turnover, in your engagement, and in the quiet erosion of your culture that nobody wants to be a part of and nobody intended to do. The output always reflects the input. Every single time. All of those examples, and I know there's many more we could think of, I had to live through. And the season that changed me wasn't a training event or a workshop. It wasn't a commitment to leading myself better. No, it was a commitment to a daily set of habits that I've maintained ever since. I'm going to share those with you right now. The first was reading, at least 15 minutes every single day. And not for entertainment, but for growth. Material that was oriented around examining how I thought, how I operated, how I showed up. The next was a personal development podcast every single day. Voices I trusted, perspectives that challenged me, content that kept me oriented towards growth, even on the days that I didn't feel it. And then I would daily journal reflection. One thing I learned that day, not a diary, but a discipline. Why? Well, because writing forces clarity that consuming alone never produces. I committed to finding a mentor and community, people further down the road than me who are willing to be honest with me. Growth doesn't happen in isolation. It never has. And then finally committing to one area of intentional growth at a time. Not an overhaul, not trying to change everything about who I was. One thing, identified honestly and pursued deliberately, using the habits I talked about above. Now, these aren't soft suggestions, right? This is the replacement scaffold. The structure that technical development provided automatically in a way, but built deliberately on purpose for self-leadership because nobody was going to build it for me. But here's what I really want you to understand about why those habits worked. And this is the part that I think nobody talks about. We don't rise to the level of our aspirations, especially in leadership. We fall to the level of our habits. These habits don't work because you apply them consciously in leadership moments. No, they work at a level far deeper than that. They quietly reshape who you are, your default orientation, your instincts, your subconscious response to the people and the pressures around you. Your self-leadership isn't primarily a product of conscious decisions made in leadership moments. No, it's a subconscious byproduct of who you've become. And who you've become is shaped quietly and over time by what you consume, what you reflect on, and who you surround yourself with. If you change the inputs, you change the person. Change the person, you deepen the self-awareness and the self-management. And when you deepen those, You build a platform from which leading others well becomes not just possible, but natural. You're not building better leadership behaviors. You're building a better self that leads better automatically. That is self-leadership. And here's what nobody told me would happen. The results showed up in my leadership before I even realized what was happening. Things like steadiness, willingness to have hard conversations, the ability to walk into a room and actually read what was going on with my people, the confidence to lead, not just perform, not just manage, but to actually lead. I didn't wake up one day and decide I was going to be a better leader and self-lead myself better. No, I built the habits and pride that then showed up in public. How you lead a team is simply a reflection of how you lead yourself, whether you realize it or not. And how you lead yourself is a reflection of what you consume, what you reflect on, and who you surround yourself with. The habits are the lead, your leadership is the lab. You cannot change what shows up without changing what's being put in. That's the personal case. Now, here's the organizational one. Because what I just described really shouldn't be left to chance. I mean, most supervisors who develop strong self-leadership stumble into it, just like I do. They just happen to luck into the right mentor or find the right book. But the problem is, most won't. And the ones who don't stay stuck in patterns your entire operation peaceful. This is exactly why flight school, the foundational pillar of the Lead Like a Pilot framework, exists. See, ground school within flight school gives new leaders an anchor point, the intellectual and philosophical foundation for what self-leadership is, why it matters, and what building it requires. It names the habits. It establishes the standard. But an anchor point alone doesn't build momentum. It's just a starting. And that's where pre-flight and progression come in. Pre-flight builds the daily operating rhythm that keeps self-leadership habits alive in the middle of a full operational tempo. And then progression creates the long-term development infrastructure, the structure, guidance, and the community that compound growth over time. It keeps you driving up that hill. And together, all of them create this replacement scaffold, built deliberately and sustained consistently, embedded not just in how you operate in business, but in how you develop your leaders. And you don't leave it to chance. Your supervisors are moving toward productive self-leadership or away from it every single day. The only question is whether your organization has built something that's directing those inputs, or whether you're leaving it to chance and letting the world have its say. Look, if today's episode connected with you, I want to point you toward the Leaders Pre-Flight Checklist. It's available free at operationlead.com/checklist, and it's meant to serve as the self-leadership transition from a personal commitment into a daily leadership discipline. It's the habit infrastructure in its simplest form, the most practical form for how you show up every day as a supervisor. And if you're a senior leader, ready to go further to explore what it actually looks like to build a system that develops your frontline supervisors embedded within your operation, I'd invite you to learn about our system and process at operationlead.com. So here's what we covered today. Self-leadership is not a trait. It's not a destination. It's a direction. The technical world enforced a basic level of it without ever naming. And the leadership world never built the equivalent. And the gaps that created are showing up on your floor right now. Could look like a conflict avoider, look like a meeting skeptic, or the cynic, or the supervisor who can't connect with half of a team. We've all been there. Those aren't attitude problems. They are the subconscious byproduct of inputs that were never intentionally shaped. Remember, we don't rise to the level of our aspirations, but we fall to the level of our habits. If we change the inputs, we change the person. And the leader your organization gets will reflect that. Remember, how you lead a team is simply a reflection of how you lead yourself, whether you realize it or not. You cannot change what shows up without changing what's being put in. Next week, we're going to go another layer deeper. Once your supervisors are doing the internal work of self-leadership, the next question becomes, do they actually understand how they're wired? How their personality and temperament shapes who they are and how they lead, and how others experience them. That's episode 15. You won't want to miss it. I'm Craig Coyle, and this is the Frontline Leadership Podcast.